All right, number one, censorship, cult of personality, government reporters, and social credit score. Which one doesn't belong? Ms. Barnes?
I thought cult of personality.
That is correct. Why doesn't cult of personality belong? What connects censorship, government reporters, and social credit score?
Well, I just thought because those are all with China, and the cult of personality is from the girl that escaped North Korea.
Right.
And talked about it.
Right. More specifically, though, what is it about China that it focuses on? Censorship, government reporters, and social credit score. What got, Mr. Bloomer?
Oh, for China, never mind.
Ms. Avery?
China like monitors everything.
What are we using for terminology to label that? We're kind of having a play on words with that idea. We had a video that we watched on Monday, and it was kind of titled this. Yes.
Was it the firewall?
The Great Firewall of China, right? So you have the Great Wall of China, this symbol that represents, Chinese, the Chinese dynasties, right? And then we have the Great Fire. You guys know what a firewall is?
A wall of fire.
Yeah, a wall of fire. Okay.
Like a battery?
What's a firewall? Yeah.
Basically like a barrier for like the internet and stuff that like restricts people from getting in and like searching different things.
There you go. So it is a barrier. I like that idea. Think of it like an internet barrier, an internet wall. So our school has a firewall. We use the GoGuardian system, right? And so that keeps you from like going to Amazon and purchasing everything and anything on Amazon, right? But at the same time, it protects us as well. It keeps all these phishing emails out, right, for the most part. It protects us from scammers and those type of things, right? People that we don't want in our system, right? So with the firewall in China, it's the government. The government is monitoring everything people do, allowing only so many websites to be searched, and then also hopefully protecting them that way. At least that's from their perspective, protecting them from bad things. Number two, McDonald's Island, Kim Jong-un, in Croatia. Which one doesn't belong? Cheyenne? Kim Jong-un. Why doesn't Kim Jong-un belong?
Because all the other ones, Marriott and Louis.
Exactly. So, where's Kim Jong-un from? From China? Good try. North Korea. Kim Jong-un's from North Korea. All right? But Miss Nerdia and Miss Doris referenced the cleaner McDonald's that are overseas. And Miss Nerdia lives on an island. And Miss Doris is from Croatia. Number three, Wu Wei, rules, 5 elements, harmony with nature. Colton.
Rules?
Rules is correct. Why is it rules? What connects Wu Wei, 5 elements, and harmony with nature? Yes, Miss Bailey. All right, so that's one of them. But what connects 5 elements to Wu Wei and harmony with nature?
Because those 5 elements come from nature.
Okay. So what is what's the idea behind the 5 elements? Ms. Oberst? Is Taoism, right? So 5 elements associated with Taoism. Wu Wei is the principle of non-action, going with the flow. It's a good principle, strong principle, reflecting the ideas of Taoism. And then harmony with nature is the goal of Taoism, to achieve harmony with nature. All right, the last one's a good one. 7.7, 1.3, 1.13, 1.69. Which one doesn't belong, Cameron? D is good guess. You're up to a 33% chance of getting right. C is good guess. He's up to a 50% chance of getting right. A is correct. Thank goodness. It is 7.7.
I thought it was 7.7.
Ah. So what connects 1.3, 1.13, and 1.69? What connects those? Ms. Greta.
Well, the rest have to do with because 1.13 is China's population, and then 1.13 is the male dominance number, and then 1.69 is the fertility rate in China.
Good. What's 7.7?
The whole world population.
7.7 people, right? 7.7 billion people, right? So we got 7.7 billion people, and that doesn't belong. 1.3 billion is the population of China. 1.13 is the sex ratio, so 113 males for every 100 females. 1.69 is the current fertility rate. In China, it's below 2, so over a long period of time, that would decrease one's population. Sound good? Not taking into account, immigration issues as well. Sound good? Any questions about our bell work today? No? All right, let's do our word of the day.
Wow, I'm so sorry.
What?
One of the maps. You and the other titles.
Yep.
Did you forget there's a cement wall behind you? Actually,
Alright. Cash is our word. We're going to see something similar in the spring semester. We're going to come back and watch a video about this two young guys about your age actually get lost in the barrens, the wilderness in Canada. And in their attempt to survive out there, they create a food cache, and a bear comes up and gets the best of it. Gets into their food cache, so that's why the bear is there. A cache is a stockpile or a reserve. The antonyms, we're going to go with ways in which you can deplete the cache. So we start with consume. The bear dipped into our food cache. The chances of starvation are increasing for those boys that are out in the wilderness. You got one more synonym?
Save.
A save. Save.
Save.
Save. To save would be a verb. We're looking for a different part of speech. Yes? A vault. There you go. V-A-U-L-T. Keep it in the vault. Part of speech. Miss Scott? It is a noun. And then we're going with verbs on different ways to eliminate the cache. Ms. Kaufman? Devour. But the bear devouring the cache. Consume, devour. Got one more. Ms. Oaks? Ingest. How do we spell ingest? Yep. To take food, drink, or another substance into the body by swallowing it or absorbing it. Ingest. I-N-G-E-S-T. All right. We're doing a hyperbole again, so an extreme exaggeration. And our sentence context today, I got a list for us today. At the end of each year, Google puts together a year in the annual year in search report. So they have different segments of the search report. And the segment that we're looking at is the what is section. So what we're looking at here is people from all over the United States, right? They're going into Google and their search starts what is, and then they type something else. So I've got a list of like the top 10. We probably won't go through all of them, but any guesses of what is on that list? Everybody goes in there trying to figure out, they don't know what it is. So they go in and say, what is, got it. Miss Avery.
What is
Dragon. Good try. No. Carson.
Like, what is going on in the government?
What is going on in the government? You have to be more specific.
Like,
People don't search what is going on in the government, at least.
going on with the impeachment?
There's something associated with the impeachment, but you got to be more specific. Yes, Miss Zobers. What is the weather? Good try.
That's what the weather.
Yes, Miss Avery.
What is happening in North Korea?
Good try. No, not very many people do that, evidently. At least not in the top 10. You got to do something that everybody's common. What is the masses going to search? Colton.
Like maybe something along the lines of like, what is the score of the football game or something?
So we had somebody last hour was very adamant about that, and like kept on answering that one over and over again. No. So there are people out there that do search for sports scores, but again, that's a lot of times going to vary from team to team, so it's going to decrease the number of hits they have. Miss Greta,
What is the Holocaust?
what is the Holocaust? You got the right idea, but no, not in the top 10. Maybe that was popular, Google wasn't around in the 1940s. Mhm. Other ideas? Genesis.
What is the answer to it?
What is the answer? No. Again, there's more than just students using Google. Yes.
What is the definition of?
Good try. Yes.
What is Ebola?
You're okay. That's better, but no, not in the top 10. Yes.
What is the problem between North Korea and the U.S.?
That's no. They're usually fairly short statements. What is blank? Right? If you're rambling on, it's probably not going to be on the list. Hadley looked it up, so he's got to put his.
I didn't.
He cheated.
I didn't.
He did it. All right. What do you got?
What is Disney Plus?
He looked it up.
No, we didn't.
I-
He did it. He's
I
not on
didn't.
there. He did.
Okay. He got it.
Wow.
Number 7 on the list. He feel good about himself.
Why are we?
So what is Disney Plus is on there. So maybe that helps you to get your another one. Miss Avery.
What is popular girls?
No. Good try.
What is Facebook?
Yes.
What is Netflix?
No. Yes.
Is it something with news?
No. Yes.
So what is Instagram?
No.
He's very confused. He's like, yes, no, yes, no.
Miss Avery.
What is going on with Trump's impeachment?
No.
What is Facebook?
Ms. Obrist.
Is it anything like with food?
Nope.
What is McDonald's?
Yes.
What is the new trends?
So that's the idea here, right? It's really trends popping up in these questions. Like people don't know what they are, and so they Google them. Yes.
What is Visco girl?
Yes. Number 2 is what is a Visco girl?
I was surprised.
Yes.
What is OK Boomer?
What is a boomer? Is number 4 on the list. Yep.
I was gonna say like what is TikTok?
No.
I think no.
Got the right idea.
Subtle plug.
Son of a boy. Yes.
What are streaks?
Streaks?
Oh, I searched that.
No.
I didn't know.
All right, I'll go ahead and share the rest. At least some of them. What is Brexit?
What?
I didn't know that was.
Brexit.
What's that? What?
We've referenced it in class before. It's the process in which Great Britain is leaving the European Union. Number 9. Again, I'm not going to do all of them, but what is the Mandalorian?
Oh, I forgot that.
Really?
I
Yep.
don't know what that is.
What is Disney Plus? What is Camp Fashion? I'm not sure what that's a reference to. What is quid pro quo? So you were referencing the impeachment. This is a part of the impeachment. Quid pro quo is a key component associated with it. What is a boomer? What is a Visco girl? And what is Area 51?
Oh, is that number one?
It is. Number 1 is what is Area 51. Yep. All right. That's our sentence context. Something about Google. You need a hyperbole and extreme exaggeration. You need to put cash in your sentence. Go ahead and take a moment to do that. All right, go ahead and share with the person in front of the person behind you. Make sure you're listening for that hyperbole. Listen for the extreme exaggeration.
Mine, people are making for like the
All right, Miss Mary, what do you got?
The cache of popular Google searches contains billions of questions.
Billions of questions. Good. Yep, the cache, the compilation, the vault, right? Very good. All right, let's go ahead and take out a sheet of notebook paper. Put your lids down, your Chromebooks, lids down. Sheet of notebook paper. We're going to talk about Japan today, and we're titling it, The History and Culture of Extremes. Culture, history of extremes. So what we're looking at here is I want you to visualize a pendulum shifting back and forth from one side to the other. So we think about like a cultural historical spectrum being in the middle. And Japan has a tendency to go from one end over here of the spectrum to all the way over here to the other end of the spectrum. It just goes back and forth. Sound good? Before we jump into our notes, let's do a little review of some geography and identifying our countries. What we got here? China. This. 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 Afghanistan. All right. Very good. What about this?
South Korea.
Yep. And this one right here in the middle. It has a tail. It comes down here. Yep. Thailand. So you can, easy trick that was shared with me how to get Thailand. Remember Thailand? It's like a tie. Like it's got a knot at the top. Tighten that knot. And then it's got a tail that comes down. It's Thailand. Sound good? What about the one that's blinking over here? Not Spain.
Croatia.
Nope. Germany? Nope.
Jordan?
Nope.
Did we take a test on this?
We haven't.
Syria?
It's interesting to see your responses, or hear your responses, though. India? No.
We haven't learned it yet.
Yeah. What is it? Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hadley. It is France. Okay. So, history of extremes, Japan. So, hang around with us a little bit more in the springtime. We'll get to that European countries and figure those out a little bit. So, all right. At times, Japan has been one of the most militaristic countries in the world. One of the most militaristic cultures in the world. We actually hinted at this idea of Japanese imperialism and Japanese fascism early in the week when we were talking about North Korea. Sometimes when you look at North Korea, we get caught up in thinking that it's all communism and it's that close relationship to the old Soviet Union. And so we think it's just Soviet communism in North Korea. But the reality is if you take that mask off of North Korea, underneath of it is really what's left over from Japanese imperialism. It's really Japanese fascism. You remember Japan had taken over the Korean Peninsula at the beginning of the 20th century, and they told the Koreans that they were like the Japanese, a superior race to everybody else. And so that's where you get this concept of fascism associated with the Korean Peninsula and the Japanese. Fascism is the same idea that you get with Hitler and Nazism in World War II as well, with this idea that the Aryan race was a superior race there. Sound good? And that contributed to the Holocaust, of course. So at times, Japan has been pretty extreme there. However, there's other ends of the spectrum where they've been one of the most pacifistic, meaning peaceful countries in the world, right? Embracing pacifism, 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 okay? Ever since the conclusion of World War II, a part of the agreement was the dismantling of Japan's defense, so their military. And the agreement was that the Allied forces, including the United States, would act as the defense of Japan thereafter, at least for an extended period of time. Now, more recently, there's evidence that suggests that Japan does have a military force. There's been some islands of dispute between Japan and China over the past 5 years. These islands are like the remnants of volcanic activity that's in the water, the seas between China and Japan, and they're really uninhabitable. However, you can gain a lot of natural resources from them, and so now Japan and China is kind of duking it out for those particular islands that way. Sound good? And in that process, that conflict between the two countries, they've been threatening one another, and then you can see that Japan kind of does have their own military today, right? But for the longest period of time, no defense. Yep. Pacifism, Pacifism, pacifism. So, fighting and conflict. Somebody that's a pacifist tries to avoid that at all costs. Okay. Japan was one of the last cultures in the world to acquire writing. One of the last. We think about the advantages of having the written word. We think about that process of going up to an advanced civilization and having time to be able to acquire that variable of writing and the exponential advantage of it. But they were one of the last to get it. But when they did get it, acquire it, they took that idea and they really ran with it really, really fast. They were one of the first to create this concept, this new genre of literature using the written word. It's a creative book. It's a story book. It begins with an N. Close. A novel. A novel is what I'm looking for. So they were one of the first cultures to come up with this concept of a novel. Sound good? One of the last to get writing. So that's a bit of an extreme, but one of the first, to use it for creative purposes with this idea of creating novels. So pretty extreme there as well. Let's think about Japanese men and Japanese women for a second. Japanese men have shown extremes of masculinity and femininity. The masculinity side would be exemplified by this character here. What would this be? The samurai warrior, right? Samurai, the samurai. So this reflects Japan's feudalistic history. They had feudalism in Japan, a land-based social system for an extended period of time. Just like there was feudalism in China, just like there was feudalism in Europe. Okay, you could think of the samurai kind of like the Japanese equivalent of the European knight, right? The equivalent of a European knight. If we think about European culture for a moment, a lot of times we're more familiar with that. We know that knights had a particular code and rules that they lived by. What's the name of the code that they live by, Mr. Folks? Chivalry. Code of chivalry, right? It's mostly about aspects of integrity, right? Certain rules, guidelines, how to treat your prisoner of war, those type of things in an ethical way. The samurai had a code as well that they lived by. This code is called the Bushido. Everybody say Bushido. Bushido. These are the samurai, the Bushido. These are key words. You may want to put asterisks or underline them, circle them, test questions here. Bushido. Bushido. Bushido is literally translated the way of the warrior. The way of the warrior. Okay? And so they would have certain principles and certain guidelines that they would have to follow whenever it came to completing their responsibilities and service towards their higher nobles up, right? Because they're knight-esque, they're, trying to protect their higher nobles' land. I'll give you one example of an aspect of the Bushido. Honorable defeat is a big part of the Bushido. Okay, if a samurai was defeated in battle and they did not die, they would perform a ritual sacrifice, ritual suicide, and that ritual suicide sacrifice was called harakiri. Everybody say harakiri. It's spelled H-A-R-A, Kari, K-A-R-I. So it demonstrates their commitment to doing everything possible to protect, their higher nobles' land, right? So that they commit their life, and knowing that if they were defeated and they didn't lose their life in the efforts to, hold on to that land and defeat their opponent, then they were going to die either way, right? So you could see this exemplified. Now this is medieval Japan, but you can see this cultural idea of the Bushido living on through Japanese fascism, Japanese imperialism. Because in World War II, you heard about these kamikaze pilots, right? So the idea is that they were defeated, but they would do like a ritual sacrifice, not necessarily ritual sacrifice, but they would all out committed. That mindset of the samurai was living on through the Japanese soldier in World War II. Sometimes you would actually see the harakiri, or hear of stories about the harakiri being used for the officers in the Japanese military during World War II as well. Okay, so that's extreme masculinity there. The other side, the other image, is extreme femininity. Japan's a paternalistic culture, meaning that it's a male-dominated culture. So for an extended period of time, women were not allowed to play a role really outside of the home. So for leisure scenarios and entertainment purposes, they developed the theater, and it's called the Kabuki Theater. Kabuki. Everybody say Kabuki. It's spelled K-A-B-U-K-I. K-A-B-U-K-I. However, again, only men, because of the rules of their culture, were allowed to participate. So if you're coming up with certain types of storylines and you only have male actors, that kind of limits what kind of storylines you can perform, right? So in order to open it up to a larger window of stories, you would have men play the roles of women, right? So they would dress up like women on the stage in the Kabuki Theater and perform, these plays, these theater performances, playing the role of a woman there. Sound good? Now today in Kabuki Theater, it's not as strong as a paternalistic society as what it once was. Women are, more equal in Japanese society, so they play the role in the theater today. Okay. Moving on to Japanese women. Japanese women have also shown extremes of masculinity and femininity. The masculinity side would be their role in agriculture. They play a large role in the growing of their particular crop. The most common crop would be what? Rice. They have a lot of responsibility concerning that. You see this in a number of different cultures. For example, like the Amerindian cultures, we'll look at it in the springtime. Women played a very large role when it came to agriculture there as well. Okay. The other extreme of femininity from the female side for women would be the geisha women. That would be Geisha. 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 Geisha women were talented young women that were used for entertainment purposes. Right? They were invited to social events, and they would play music. They were well versed in social etiquette, those type of things. So a conversation. So in the paternalistic society, they were seen as a form of entertainment. From the Western world, the idea of the geisha has kind of been distorted to portray similar concepts to that of like prostitution, but the true cultural form of the geisha does not have too many similarities there. Mostly for social purposes, entertainment. Japan has one of the most distinct cultures in the world, right? However, most of their culture has actually been borrowed from other cultures, and we'll get some more examples of that here in a moment. But one of their examples is the architecture, right? They have very distinct architecture. Their buildings are really unique. Think about their geography for just a second. You have extremes in Japan. A lot of times we don't realize this. I don't think that people know the extremities that are found in Japan. So you do get the Florida-esque type weather in the southernmost regions of Japan, like in Okinawa. Looks like a pretty good vacation spot. But I think a lot of people miss that it gets really cold in the northernmost portions of Japan. Okay. Nobody really wants to live in the northernmost portions of Japan because of how cold it is there. Okay, they have an indigenous population in Japan called the Ainu. Ainu is spelled A-I-N-U. Indigenous population. So the people that were there on the islands first, right? And they have been discriminated for many years over the course of Japan's history, and they have been forced off of their land, and which encompassed all of Japan. They've been pushed to the northernmost portions of Japan where really nobody else in Japan really wants. Sound good? Sounds very similar to what we've had here in the American, history, right? You got Native Americans, the indigenous population of the Americas. They've been pushed off farther and farther west, onto Amerindian reservations there. So you got some similar history in that aspect. So very cold in the north. You have some instability concerning weather and climate. First off, you got these large weather systems like this. Kind of looks like a what? Like a hurricane, but they don't necessarily term it a hurricane in Southeast Asia. They give it a different name. Does anybody know what that's called? They call it a typhoon in Southeast Asia. So it's referenced as a typhoon rather than a hurricane. Same characteristics of the storm there. Okay. There's also this, and you can see this as well. This is really the same thing. What's this? Actually, this may be a little bit different. What's this one? A tsunami. Okay. Tsunami is spelled with a T. T-S-U-N-A-I. Or N-A-M-I. Right? So what causes a tsunami? What causes it, Carson? Earthquakes? Yep, underneath on the ocean floor, like the Pacific Ocean, right? So it's plate tectonics pushing up against one another, pulling apart from one another, and so creates that movement of water, and then you get this huge tidal wave. So they have them every once in a while. And about 10 years ago, they had one that was really significant, something that they hadn't experienced. So they have different methods by which they try to knock down the tidal wave before it gets to the land. And this one was so big, they couldn't really do much about this one. Okay, they have nuclear power plants in Japan, and because of this one tidal wave, it flooded this nuclear power plant. So they really had a nuclear meltdown there. Right, so some of the unwanted nuclear waste got out in the Pacific Ocean because of it. So it was kind of a big hazard. So you guys see the map over here? You got all the lines, the red lines and the green lines in the ocean. Those are water currents. And there's one over here, the red one that comes up, starts here in Japan. It goes across the northern Pacific. It comes all the way up here to the west coast. So a year or so after this nuclear meltdown over in Japan, they could detect the nuclear waste over here on the west coast. Right? Because it had traveled all the way across the Pacific Ocean there. Crazy stuff. All right, Japan has a very short history, a relatively short history. It's been inhabited. The islands have been inhabited by the indigenous populations for over 30,000 years. So a long history. But the first recorded history in Japan just took place only 1,300 years ago. So a fairly short written history in comparison to other parts of the world. A lot of the culture that Japan has was actually borrowed from the Chinese culture. You remember, China was a cultural hearth. We described China as a cultural hearth. Cultural hearth is a foundational culture, and so all the surrounding cultures take on the ideas of that cultural hearth. Now, what Japan has done is he's taken ideas from China, but then they change it up and then they make it their own. Okay, so writing, government, aspects of economics, religion, a lot of that, those ideas originated in China, like Buddhism, and even aspects of Shintoism, which you kind of find to be unique to Japan. One cultural social norm that some would say would be an extreme is this concept of the wa, W-A, the wa. And it's a reflection of collectivism. You want to write collectivism out to the side. The way the saying that goes along with the wa is the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. The nail that sticks up gets hammered down. So how does this apply to social norms and people's behavior on a daily basis? If you're not doing what the rest of society is doing, what the group is doing, then you're like the nail that's sticking up. And society as a whole is going to come in at you like a hammer and make you conform, right? So if you're wearing clothes that, society says, that's not the clothes that you should be wearing, people are going to look at you, give you the evil eye and make you feel so uncomfortable that you're going to conform fairly quickly. Sound good? So this concept is more of a traditional social norm in Japan. You probably still see remnants of it today in Japan, but Japan is a little bit more individualistic, I would say, than some of the other Southeast Asian cultures. Okay, but you still, still see remnants of this, the wa and the collectivism there. All right. During the Middle Ages, Japan, they were identified as extremely nationalistic. Remember we talked about nationalism a couple weeks ago with the Chinese Exclusion Act? Nationalism, the idea that you have so much faith and confidence and love towards your country that it becomes detrimental to other countries around them. Right? So with this nationalistic identity, they also began to turn a little bit inward and they cut themselves off from the rest of the world. Remember when we studied the Chinese dynasties? Those dynasties that cut themselves off from the rest of the world, they turned inward. Did good things happen for them or bad things happen for them? Bad things. So culturally, they started to revert a little bit. Okay? So they were isolated and kind of regressed. At the end of the 19th century, so that would be the end of the 1800s, there's this guy named Commodore Matthew Perry. He's a Westerner. Came to Japan, and he kind of introduced them to some Western ideas. And as a result, he kind of began this process of opening Japan back up again. Instead of being isolated, now they start to think about what's going on outside of Japan. They started getting introduced to different Western concepts. They started bringing in, importing, acculturating Western ideas, such things as beer and pastries and art and music. Anybody know who this is? Yeah, very good. All right. At the beginning of the 20th century, that's when you get to the idea of the Japanese imperialism. So, we've referenced, British imperialism, Rudyard Kipling, civilizing the uncivilized stuff, right? And then we've talked a little bit about American imperialism, setting up our own world empire. We haven't really talked about Japanese imperialism, though. So, Japan, started conquering other areas, like the Korean Peninsula, and said, all right, now you're part of the Japanese Empire, okay? So this is where this Japanese fascism comes into play a little bit there as well. Sometimes when we look at China and Japan, sometimes Westerners, Americans in particular, they kind of group all Asians together, and sometimes they will mix them up and make the assumption that somebody is Japanese while they're Chinese, or somebody's Chinese while they're actually Japanese. And then when we make that mistake as an American, something whatever, move on, right? Don't make much of a big deal about it. But somebody from Southeast Asia, from Japan or China, they take great offense to that. And there's a reason for that, because there's some animosity between the Japanese culture and the Chinese culture. And it actually has remnants going back to World War II and Japanese imperialism. When Japan was setting up this empire, they conquered portions of China as well. One of the Chinese cities was named Nanking. And when they took over Nanking, the men and the military personnel that was in Nanking had fled, right? And so the idea was that there was only women and children. And so, if you have, certain rules of war, you're not going to exploit the women and the children, right, and the elderly. But the Japanese, when they came through Nanking, they did that, right? They did a lot of awful things to the people of Nanking that were left there, okay? And so because of that, history, China and Japan, there's a lot of conflict, between them. And so they, want to be deciphered, differentiated as being Chinese or Japanese, and throwing them all into the same group, all Chinese, Japanese into the same group, is somewhat offensive there. All right, let's finish 3 questions before we go.